My parents actually, they were highly educated. They were English professors in China. They came here to do their graduate studies, and they were cleaning toilets for people. They also didn't complain. They weren't even like, this is below me, this is above me. This was just what needed to get done in order to survive. And part of the ability to survive is the ability to endure. If you're going to sweep streets like Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. No matter what you do, be the best in the world at it. Everyone wants success and excellence, as you say. Success is against human nature. You have to fight every instinct just to succeed.
You just made all of my struggles make sense. Welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. This is Jeff Lerner, your host. Always so excited to be here, having amazing conversations with amazing human beings. Today, we are joined by someone I am really interested in getting to know better and hearing all her war story, so to speak. Carrie Sun. Carrie was born in China, raised in Michigan. She is a math and finance dual degree holder from MIT. I saw on her website, she also holds a master's in creative writing from the New School and lives in Jersey City. She wrote a book called Private Equity. I'm not going to presume to tell her story for her, but basically she was deeply embedded in a big, private equity, Wall Street hedge funds, and wrote a book about what that world is really like. And actually, I'm going to just kind of leave it there because I want the details to be hers to unpack. But I'm really excited. My audience knows that I have quite an interest in high finance. And frankly, I'm somewhat on a mission to do a little bit of reformation work with capitalism itself. And we probably have lots to talk about. So, Carrie, welcome to Unlock Your Potential.
Thank you so much for the chance to speak to you today, Jeff.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I am excited. Why don't we just start at the beginning, if we could? I read that your parents, as I understood it, fled China under the regime of Mao.
That's right.
You can get into some deep geopolitics and history and then bring us current. So please.
Right. My parents were the first college classes in China after the fall of the Cultural Revolution. So they suffered during the Cultural Revolution, in which certainly the educated people from the cities were sent down during their teenage years to do manual labor in the countryside. And so they were just farming rice and carrying pails of rain water to make reservoirs up and down mountains. It was very difficult physical labor. And
this was under the thumb of the government. Like
under the thumb of
do this.
Yes, exactly.
And when was this?
Mid 70s to late 70s. And 1976 or 76, 77 was the fall of sort of when the Cultural Revolution ended. One of the most turbulent periods in Chinese history. A lot of people were persecuted and died from that period, but my parents survived, and they so during the Cultural Revolution, education was completely stopped. The only education at the time was political education, and some children of the very elite were actually able to go to some schools, but by and large, for the population of China, there was no schooling to be had. And my parents still had the strength and fortitude of mind to continue to study on their own. Like both my mom and dad tell me they saved banned books and read them like when the lights were out, like when the guards couldn't see them, and so that's how they continued to keep their mind sharp, and that's how much they valued education. They were really risking their lives at that point to keep themselves educated. But when the Cultural Revolution ended, they took the National College Entrance Exam. In China, it's like the SAT, but it's only the SAT. There's nothing else. It's just the one test, and you get placed into college. And because there wasn't there hadn't been college for at least a decade at that point. There were all these people. So it wasn't just 18-year-olds taking these tests. It was
Mm,
18 to 35, age range. Everyone wanted to get into college just um, to have a future,
yeah.
that they were denied by the government, exactly as you say. So my parents took the test, and to get into any college during those years, I think the acceptance rates were around 5%. And so they I mean, they worked hard both in manual labor and also education to continue their studies. They were accepted into college, and they chose to major in English language and
Mm.
literature in college. After they finished their degrees, they were English professors in China. And this was during the 80s and mid 80s. And then a couple of visiting scholars and professors from the United States visited the institution that my parents um, were at the time, and then offered to bring them over to the United States. So my dad came over to Michigan State University in 1988. My mom and I followed in 1990, and we were able to sort of, I think we were definitely able to immigrate because 1990 is right after the uh, Tiananmen
Cinnamon
Square.
Square. So your
Yeah,
mom came in or no, your dad came in 88,
yeah,
and then you guys were able to come 2 years later.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And we were on tourist visas. We had 6 months in the United States just to visit my dad. And when we had about a month and a half left in our tourist visas, again, this is how, like, I think the government really, really matters, both, like, in China, also in the United States. Uh, President Bush at the time signed into law. Sorry, that's a little bit later. First, he signed an executive order that allowed Chinese citizens who had been in the United States after Tiananmen to stay sort of at least for a few years at that time, no matter their visa, because at that time, well, still, currently there's United States and China have a very difficult relationship, and Tiananmen Square was kind of all about, suppressing sort of democracy. And so any Chinese citizens in the United States, if they went back to China, risked political persecution.
Mm.
And so we were part of the cohort, Chinese citizens in the United States after Tiananmen Square, that uh, were allowed to stay. And so we were kind of accidental refugees. But all of this matters to my backstory matters to my later story, as you know. So, and we can get into that, but that's how we were
So,
able to immigrate.
so that gets you to Michigan. I mean, we could do a whole other podcast on the Chinese,
Yeah.
politics and culture and history behind that. But I think, we're here to lead somewhere else. But that's fascinating. So you end up in Michigan. Your parents are obviously well educated, you know, self-directed, motivated people. What do they end up doing? And yeah, what were they doing? Like, what was sort of I guess I'm asking, what was like your standard or quality of life in that
Right.
period?
So, they were very educated. When my dad came over, he was in a PhD program. He was first in a master's program at Michigan State and then in a PhD program. My mom then, after we decided to stay, also joined a master's program, also at Michigan State. So they were, uh, getting their graduate degrees at Michigan State University, but my standard quality of life was very poor. We were definitely in poverty. I had free lunch at school
Yeah.
because my parents were, they had to pay out-of-state tuitions at a time when, there were very, very few Chinese students or
Were they
just
living
Chinese
on
people.
were they living on student loans? I mean, how did they pay
Well,
for?
yeah, great. So, I mean, they worked multiple jobs. Like, dishwasher. My dad was a Domino's pizza
Mm.
delivery person. My mom, cleaned houses. And that's how they pieced it together by working multiple. She was also a babysitter. It was working multiple jobs, odd jobs to make it work. Yeah.
So,
And that's where
so
I think I got my work ethic. So yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I'm seeing the foundation of your future story. I mean, you're in this environment where, and I think this is so like, this is sort of meta. I mean, this is proxy for millions of stories in a sense where like come to this country, land of opportunity, theoretically democracy and freedom, but yet the reality, hyper educated, I mean, highly intelligent refugees delivering pizzas,
Yes.
washing dishes,
Yes.
this juxtaposition of like opportunity, but the reality.
Yes,
And
exactly.
then
And
you
yeah.
and how many of those families sort of say, okay, our child, like our progeny, is going to be the recompense for the sacrifice. Were you an only
Yeah.
child?
Yes. Yes. Because I
Okay, yeah,
I
and
was
I,
also
I just got
yeah.
to share with you. I went to a private school growing up that was sort of like pre DEI awareness of like having a somewhat diverse student body, and they had a number of scholarships for different types of students. And there were a few kids in my class that I remember literally around early 90s that I'm wondering now, I'm like reprocessing my childhood of like, hey, I wonder if they were part of this refugee cohort because they were Asian. I mean, they were Chinese. They worked their butts off. They made all of us spoiled white kids look like dumb jocks. I mean, they just like raised the bar to a whole new level, standardized test score, expectations, and I mean, they literally like changed the school because they just worked so much harder and
Yeah.
appreciated so much more what they had, what we
Yes.
had. So
Yes.
that's whether it's fair or not. That's what I'm mapping your experience to in my life.
Yeah. Well, it's that what you say is absolutely true. I was and continue to be an only child, and um I my it was very clear to me. Actually, this line is in my book. My mom says to me, pretty much any second I'm not studying is a second wasted, and so like even when school was easy for me as I went through my K-12 education, and then I would take some time off just to hang out with friends, and it was like, no, what are you doing? Like you have to be studying. You're wasting your spring break by not studying. And it's like, well, I already finished all the homework, but it doesn't matter. So it's just always more, always studying. It's very interesting because this other kind of common story that people tell about Chinese, certainly mother, is the tiger mother, which was very interesting to me because my parents actually not once ever asked for my report card. They never, even though they sort of, I would say, in their view, they gave me a lot of freedom, but I kind of never actually felt free. So they would tell me like, "Oh, you're free to do whatever you want, but you should be studying all the time." It's like it's still they instill in me a work ethic that kind of pushed me to the brink later in my life. But a lot of that was because I saw how much they had sacrificed in order to just move to America, stay in America, and give me opportunities. They really, when they took on those jobs, they were highly educated. They were English professors in China. They came here to do their graduate studies, and they were cleaning toilets for people, and it was just. My dad tells me the stories of delivering pizza and how people would be racist to him and not give him any tip, and he like drove all this way in a cold Michigan winter to deliver the pizzas. And it was just a very difficult time. It was so much of a struggle. And they did all that for me. So it was hard for me not to then
Yeah.
be like, I have to work, and I have to kind of make good on what they were sacrificing to give me. That said, when they were working these jobs, there was it's so also very interesting because it all goes back to kind of I think there's in my story I don't use this specific term in my book, but it does show through narrative a lot of intergenerational trauma. But part of it is also an intergenerational um, inheritance of work ethic because they had survived the Cultural Revolution, where it was just like you didn't have any freedom at all, like no freedom of thought, no freedom of your day. Like if you didn't do something correct. So people were paid in terms of like points. And you would exchange your points at the end of a work day for and a work period for a little money. And I think if I do all the exchange rates of, at the time, I think my parents were getting paid something like 1 penny an hour. And if someone in your team said you didn't do something correctly, or if your manager, your team leader said you didn't do something correctly, or you didn't have the right attitude. So attitude was important to you. You were judged not only on your work output, but your attitude. Sometimes you would be docked a whole day's worth of points just for having the wrong attitude. So you can imagine, working 10 hours a day to make 10 cents and losing that all because you said something wrong to your boss. So that was
Wow.
the environment under which they grew up. And so they kind of just, their attitude is just like work, 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 don't complain, and just work. And when they were doing these odd jobs in America to be able to pay their tuition, they also didn't complain. They weren't even like, this is below me, this is above me. This was just what needed to get done in order to survive. Their whole thing was about survival, and so and part of the ability to survive is the ability to endure. And they endured a lot, and and they definitely passed that on to me as well.
I I think this is so powerful for us to hear, and I don't want to bog down in this part of the story, but it's like it's so profound in the context of modern day America, where you have, I think, in not in like a cliche old man wagging his finger sense at the young people, but like it just is what it is. It's no one's doing, but you have kind of a younger, like I would say millennials and Gen Z that I've from having employed a number of them. It's not that like they're lazy or they don't work hard. Some do, some don't, right? It's a mixed bag. But like in general, and I would say, I mean, it's not even generational. This is true for me too. Like there's just no context, no way to even relate to the level of privation that you're describing. And for us, just the number of things that we take for granted in terms of the opportunities. But then the other big thing that I'm wondering, and this I actually would really be interested in your commentary on, is like, I'm sure it sounds like you have had a lot of conversations with your parents about how, the world at that time, their environment at that time and how it got to be. I'm curious, there's a school out there that's sort of like sounding the alarm right now that, hey, America is on this slippery slope toward, basically, loss of free speech, standardization of even what we're allowed to think, and that hey, those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it, and that like, watch out, America, this is where we're going. And I'm curious, from someone who grew up with people that lived the cultural evolution to, totalitarianism, do you see validity in those parallels?
Jeff, you're totally right. That's a great question. That I have also read pieces comparing sort of what's possibly happening in America. I mean, definitely in some ways, and more in certain corners of the United States to what was happening in China at the Cultural Revolution at the time. I think about, I can I can talk for about sort of the concept of freedom, right? And you just mentioned
Right.
like freedom of speech as one example. I think it's very interesting because I think it's human nature to want to have some sort of agency over some part of your life. And there is a lot of chatter about how Chinese people, certainly during the Cultural Revolution, and also sadly now, with the persecution of the Uyghurs, for example, and other really horrific events, don't have freedom. And I think they don't have freedom in the kind of American conception of it. But something that I think about a lot is kind of where you can't get freedom in kind of what I will say more public or macro ways, like in China, even today when you apply to college, you really have to you can't really decide your major on your own. You have to say what you want to do, and then the schools accept you based on various things and tests. So it's like there's still, you might not be able
and you
to
can't change it midstream. It's like once you're on a track, you're stuck on that track. Is that true?
That's often the case. So
Okay.
So in some of these kind of larger ways, there isn't. And yet, I mean, this is such a small example, but I really think that a lot of who we are, certainly at work and later in our lives and our career, is formed by our early experiences in our family and our home. And so whereas perhaps Chinese people don't have the kind of freedom of self-determination in the American sense, they still I would say they have a kind of localized freedom where within a family structure, they're very honest about saying what they think all the time. And they're super blunt, about everything, like just telling people what they look like. For example, my mom will be like, "Oh, your brows are too thin. Your this is too that," and like you smile all wrong. There's a lot of freedom in the local family sense of just being very honest about what you think all the time.
That's so interesting. I mean, because there's these stereotypes, right? Like, what's the show, the movie about my Asian mother, my Asian stepmother, or something?
Mm-hmm.
I forget. Anyway, it's there's you see this in movies, right? And there's always a stereotypical Asian mother, right? But and I was raised Jewish, so we have stereotypical mothers too.
Yeah.
But that's such an interesting frame that you put that in, where a lot of the things that call it mainstream TV commercial America might say oh, they're crass, or they're blunt, or they're too direct, or they they don't, I don't know, they don't get it, they don't get how we're supposed to be nice to each other all the time. And it's yeah, but if you've come about, if you have multi-generational experience of restricted macro freedoms, that just speaking your mind is a tiny little act of rebellion.
Exactly.
That's you claiming your God-given right to actually have freedom in some aspect of your life. And maybe we should be celebrating that and saying you go, Asian lady, because damn it, at least you're free to say that.
Yes.
That's actually really interesting. So thank you for helping me re-see the world.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. But absolutely, I think my Chinese background really set me up for the story I kind of describing in the book, because also there's this aspect of, I also mentioned this term in my book called 吃苦, which is eat suffering. That is, I can't tell you how many times I heard that term.
Wait, say it again. I want to look it up. It sounds kind of fabulous. Chuku?
吃苦. It's,
how would you spell it in English?
Okay, so in Pinyin, it would be CHIKU. It's U technically with an umlaut, but
okay.
And it translates to eat suffering and eat bitterness. And anything happened in my family, my parents were just like, 吃苦, let's 吃苦. 吃苦 was a way to just survive anything. So if something is causing you suffering or bitterness, you just eat it and you just continue on. Um, and that was how they were able to power through, I mean, literally everything, as you say, a totalitarian Mao regime
Yeah.
to, I also think about the kind of psychological, certainly ideological whiplash from going from communist China to capitalist America, right? Because
Yeah.
often,
Well,
those,
and it was capitalist, racist, stratified America.
yes,
It wasn't just
exactly.
like, oh, yay,
Yeah.
milk and honey.
Yes, and they
Yeah.
started off, we just really had no money. My parents were soaking stamp off of incoming mail to reuse them because they didn't have I don't know, it was 20 cents at the time or something. It was such a
Uh,
struggle. It was such a struggle for
Stuff
us.
like that, literally, like, I have to like take a breath
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I think about my life. Imagine, like, I encourage the audience, take a moment. Like, imagine soaking envelopes to pull stamps off so that it's like digging under the couch for coins just
yes.
so you can eat
Just so you can eat, and they
while
were
you have
using
master's degrees.
they have master's degrees, and it's not even like they were writing fun letters to friends. It was to be able to pay some bill through the mail. They
Right.
didn't have the stamp money to pay that bill. So, but the sort of I mean, certainly the more uplifting end of this is through their hard work and their graduate degrees. I think we were able to move just upward. My family was definitely upwardly mobile. So I started off in that environment, but by the time I finished high school, I think we were um, just comfortably middle class. And so I think if I do the math right, in 7 years, they were able to move from very poverty-driven circumstances to comfortably middle class. And then in college, as you said at the start, I double majored in math and finance. I also minored in economics. I graduated in 3 years, and they were able to provide for all of that. I also had both need and merit scholarships, but I ended up not paying anything for college. And so that's sort of like, I mean, in many ways, just on a pure like socioeconomic standpoint, I think my parents did achieve their American dream,
Yeah.
they did, but I
Incredible.
think it was also, as I write in the personal story in my book, I think somewhat at a cost to my uh, mental well-being. There, I think there are very human costs to that upward mobility because they were, I mean, just on a pure like just material level, they were not able to spend pretty much any time with me. I spent a lot of time by myself, and it was very difficult to me to feel any sort of nurturing love from them. But I knew they expressed their love through just giving me this chance at my American dream, which was
Are they
why
still
I
alive?
felt they are still both alive. Yes.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. So in my book, right out of the gate, I basically, I mean, admittedly, it's an opening, so it's meant to get some attention, but it's like, basically I'm calling it. I'm saying the American dream is dead, although it may still
Mm,
be staggering around, so we haven't called it yet. But even from what I've read about your book, I haven't read your
mhm.
book. What I think I really like about it is it's calling out the American dream as it was. Like, we use that term American dream, and there's a connotation of like, this blissful, glowing state. But like, dreams aren't always, I mean, a nightmare is a dream too. And I'm not saying it was an American nightmare, but it's somewhere on a spectrum, right? It's not all unicorns and rainbows. And the American dream had even before it was dead or dying, had a pretty serious dark side.
Yes. It's so when I told my dad about this book, he hasn't read it either. But I told him about all the kind of, difficult parts of it. And I said, well, Dad, to like you have achieved your version of the American dream. And you must know. And he's like, yeah, it's all suffering. It was actually all suffering to achieve this
Yeah.
dream, And so, um, and also it's interesting that when I talk to my mom about it, she's very just she is definitely not like, oh, I did something great. Like she's like, I was able to do that then. I don't, she's concerned how the American dream that she lived in, when she immigrated in 1990, it's not possible now. She
Yeah.
said, if we immigrated now, it would be impossible for us to work those jobs, go to school, and then send you to MIT, and then you don't pay for
They
a
wouldn't
dime of
even be
it.
able to afford, no matter how many shifts they tried to work, they wouldn't be able to afford the tuition now. They wouldn't be able to
Exactly.
afford the housing now.
Exactly.
They wouldn't even be able to afford a gallon of milk now. I mean,
Yes. Yes. Exactly. And so, yeah, to your point that the American dream is dying, I feel that, and I am concerned.
every time I have certain conversations, I think, okay, I need to become one of those podcasts that's got like 3 hour sit down conversations. Because frankly, the bigger and better the show gets, the bigger and better the conversations get, and the greedier I get to want more time with people. But anyway, that's for later. Right now, keeping an eye on the clock. Um, Pick us up at MIT. Obviously, you're clearly academically both gifted and driven. I think you don't do what you did without both being true. Um, and and then you go, what? You just venture forth onto Wall Street?
Yeah. I was very interested in kind of finding patterns in the stock market. I was very interested I mean, from a young age. My parents also started investing in the stock market even when they had
Mhm.
very little money. There's something about just I mean, this comparison has been made so many times, but like, investing is sort of like a lottery. The stock market is kind of like a lottery. Like there's a very lottery aspect to the American dream that they just wanted to be a part of. They love casinos. They actually love like sports. It's so funny. Like they just love very American things and just wanting to have that chance
So,
at,
can I ask a
yeah,
question?
yeah,
Double click on that real quick. Is that an Asian thing? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. I'm in Vegas right now. I shared with you. I'm right
yeah.
down the street is the Wynn, which is where my wife and I used to stay all the time. And for reasons that don't matter, we have kind of stay somewhere else lately. But it's like 80%
Yeah.
Asian.
Yeah.
And all the decor is, I mean, you can tell when they built it, they were like expecting Asians to come. And they
Yes.
did. And they love it. And they sit there and they play the slots and they bet on the
Yes.
sports books. And I watch it. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're like kids in a candy store. Is this a cultural thing? Or am I? And it's like hard to talk about because you're a white guy that sounds like an asshole when you even point it out. But
Well, I
that's a
think it
thing,
is
huh?
cultural. It is a thing. And both my parents, my dad more, but my mom willingly goes to the casinos and they play slots. And it's just very interesting to me because um, they both like sort of changed careers. My mom, they were in English literature and language in China, and then my dad is ended up being a computer database specialist for the state of Michigan, and my mom is a data researcher
Mm.
and for she has a master's in statistical methods and for the University of Michigan. So they both are highly quantitative, and yet they play slots. It's like, well, the house always wins, but why are they
Right.
playing anyway? So it's telling me that there is something deeply human about just even if you don't win the possibility of believing that it's possible.
Well,
And
do you think it
yeah,
correlates to that, what we were talking about earlier, that like when all of your freedoms have been taken, you start to place a higher value on the notion of like chance?
I absolutely think so.
Okay.
And I also think, just in terms of getting a little bit into the financial side, in China, I think there is much higher retail participation in just the markets. Like the average person, like my aunts are like when I went to China, the last time I went to China was 2019, about a half a year before COVID. And like I was waking up and there's my aunt like checking, how her stocks were doing. And I was like, wow, I don't even do that. So I'm talking about like individual single name securities. And so there's just
Right.
this Participation.
So
Yeah.
to call out that distinction, you're saying she's not just investing in a mutual fund and trusting someone else to pick the stocks. She's
Yeah.
literally doing that research.
Yes.
And my guess is, I mean, you worked on Wall Street for a number of years. She's back in China. She probably isn't really investing what we would consider that much money
No,
relative to maybe
yeah.
like what you would play with.
Exactly, exactly. And here in the United States, the whole financial market, there's so much more institutionalized, with
Right.
just, you know, it's just so much more smart money. I don't want to
So
imply that
that's
my aunt is
so
not
does that mean
smart,
that
but
in
yeah.
China the markets are actually, I mean, because that's the big thing about American markets is if you don't understand, institutional trading and algorithmic trading and the forces that really move the market, there's almost seemingly no rhyme or reason to how the markets move here if you don't understand those forces. But there, is it more, what would the word be, rational in the sense that at least it's spread across the actions of millions of individuals versus computers and institutions?
Well, that is a fascinating question because while it is spread over like individuals and China has a large population, it's
Right.
still said to be not. I mean, I just like it's a can of worms whether the Chinese market is efficient or not, or just the whole efficiency of markets in general. But um, it can lead to much higher volatility because people are not usually trading on the same things or are on the same like fundamental metrics, and there's just it can lead to wild swings. That's not to say that doesn't happen here in the United States. It does, but it's just um, a little more. I mean, I'll give you another example. So my grandmother, on my dad's side, um, she had this. I mean, this is. I don't think this is rational, but she has been playing. She has been betting in the stock market in the Chinese stock market since at least the 80s, which is when I was born. She like goes all in, bets everything. So it's like double or nothing all the time. And so she's lost her fortune several times, but she's also miraculously made a fortune like also several times. And by the time now she has unfortunately passed away, but in her later years, she made a lot of money just by betting everything on certain companies and uh, places. And then she ended up paying off my parents' mortgage in Michigan. So it's just,
Wow.
there's just this
And that's
lot.
considered,
Yeah.
call it normal behavior, because I feel like in America,
Yeah.
if a relative, particularly if an elderly relative was
Yeah.
doing that, we would like be taking them to court to have them declared incompetent and like put their assets in a trust. But like you're saying, that's like another
Well,
day at work over there.
okay. So I do think that my family and certainly my grandmother was kind of on the extreme risk-taking side.
Okay.
But I also think I inherited some of that from her, which is that like I don't think I'm risk loving, like just for the sake of risk itself. But she is willing to bet big when it matters. And that's something that I have just, even without knowing this previously, I have inherited that from her. So yeah.
Well, I say often, and this is a nod to the audience, that like I actually think intelligent risk tolerance or the ability to like reasonably calculate and tolerate asymmetrical risk is a new like Darwinian adaptive survival trait that we come, as a species, we've just like inherently risk averse because there's a, tiger waiting to eat us if we leave the cave. I literally think the reason that we're seeing, whether it's the X Games or Daredevil Sports or the emergence of the derivatives market, or like there's all these things now that we see that are like little indicators that the human species relationship to risk is evolving. I actually think that it's a survival trait now. Um, and I think that's something I challenge people to think about a lot, that like this ain't your grandma's world anymore. So don't have your grandma's approach to risk anymore.
Yeah. Yes.
Particularly in America, where the grandparent is usually like, well, when I grew up in the Depression, we had to eat beans two beans for dinner, which like and therefore they don't want to take any risk.
Right.
And it's like in the modern world, when you can't even afford a gallon of milk, if you're not taking risk, you are ensuring insolvency over time.
Right. And so, I mean, I think about this concept of just what you're saying about risk all the time. My parents took a huge risk moving to a country where they knew absolutely no one. They left behind really great careers, a huge loving family on both sides in order to just start completely anew. I mean, that just level of risk taking.
Right.
I just like, so here I am, to get a little bit into my career, I've like sort of changed careers multiple times now. And I'm like, well, people have asked me before, just friends and family, like, did you ever doubt you would like make it? And I'm like, I mean, not really, because I know my work ethic and I know how hard I work, and no success is guaranteed, but I know how hard I work and how I will just, for me, it's like plan A only. There's no plan B. And same thing with my parents. When they moved from communist China to capitalist America, it was like plan A only. We're going to make it work. It will be personally costly.
That.
Yeah.
I want to package that and intentionally romanticize that, right? Plan A only, insane work ethic, high probability of success given a long enough time horizon.
Yes, exactly.
Full stop. That is an approach to life that I think in the modern world is probably the optimal approach to life.
Yeah. And
a lot of people are terrified to agree or refuse to agree with what I just said, but at least two of us agree.
Yeah. And on that approach, this is jumping a little bit to the end, but when I quit the world of high finance to write my book, on some like just technical levels, certainly to the IRS, I was unemployed. I mean, yeah, right. I didn't have a job. I was getting my MFA. So, I was taking on the risk by actually investing in the money. Like there's investing money and time into my new writing career that I have always wanted to do, but sort of in private equity, my memoir, I talk about all the ways that I and also my boss and peers at the time, how their work ethic, how they worked so hard and they were able to build a firm and create these extremely high returns that are just so the kind of, certainly at the time, the envy of both Wall Street and Silicon Valley. But while I critique that, it's not like I think there are limits to just like pushing that to the extreme, like dialing it up to 11. There's also some sort of like self-knowledge. You need to know that when kind of that extreme level of work ethic and optimization might be too much. But I actually work more now than I did even in high finance. And the kind of main thing is I have flexibility over my time. But just to get on your to tie it all together with like risk taking. So I took a huge risk. I didn't make any money. I was technically unemployed. I was also paying money to go to my MFA. But
the school is not cheap. I was a jazz musician, exactly. And I have friends that went to the new school, and it is not cheap.
And it's in New York. But I really felt like I had to be here because it was also my boyfriend at the time, now husband, is here, but also my literary agent here, just like publishing is here. But I carried over the same discipline I had when I was at MIT, when I was working on Wall Street, to my new writing career. I told myself I felt very behind because I didn't have an English degree in undergrad. I spent a lot of time doing something else. So how can I catch up? Well, the sort of 10,000 hours Malcolm Gladwell thing. Right. I really just did the math. I said, okay, so how am I going to master writing? And, I needed to spend 10,000 hours doing it. If I worked 8 hours a day, 365 days a year, I can do it in 3.5 years. And that's exactly how it happened. And that's how I wrote my book, And so, I mean, there was no guarantee it was going to sell or, like have the positive reception that it's having now. But all I can fall back on is my discipline. And I had that.
Hey there, real quick, I just wanted to let you know I have been concentrating a lot lately on providing tons of value to my text message community. This could be random thoughts. This could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning or a special I'm running or a free training I'm hosting. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed. The number is 702-996-3926. Thanks so much. Let's get back to the podcast.
So because I've been, as I'm watching the clock, I'm like, I want to get into the what happened on Wall Street, right? Kind of like what's in the book. But actually I'm feeling like what's in the book is what's in the book. Like people can go read the book. I mean, like maybe you can give us the headline of like Wall Street is a jumble of conflicting ethics where people work insanely hard, but they are also probably more human and decent than we want to give them credit for. And I don't know.
It is something like that. That's the headline.
Yeah. And so it sounds like a really fascinating book that I actually, I interview a lot of authors on the show, so it's not possible for me to read every guest's books, but I'm marking this one. Is there an audiobook version?
There is, yes. And I read the audiobook.
You read it? Oh, I did that too with mine. Isn't that kind of trippy to
It is so trippy.
Your own book?
Yes. And
let's try to like perform it,
Yeah, I can't do voices, so I try, but yeah.
Well, I'm definitely going to read it and encourage the audience as well, Private Equity, but like what I'm really, really drawn to in your story is this, like, I talk a lot about the transmutation of suffering into passion, because the root word of suffering is actually the root word of passion, passio, the Latin word. And I don't think that's just like an etymological coincidence. I think that literally language points us to meaning, and that suffering and passion are literally two sides of the same coin, if you in the form of some crucible that like in which it transforms, some crucible event. But like that can happen multi-generationally. That can be baked into like culture and family structure and this idea. I have it pulled up on my phone, Chiku.
Yeah.
Eating bitterness, like that's so beautiful. But what I'm loving here is you said, okay, I'm going to take 3.5 years. I'm going to write 8 hours a day. And there's no way to try to predetermine the outcome of the book getting published or the book getting read or the book getting sold, because until the book exists, there's not even anyone to ask.
Exactly.
And I like literally went through that too myself. I wrote a book, I published it in 2022, and it was the same thing where like I worked on mine on and off for 4 years, and all this time was like, a book is a uniquely thankless endeavor, because even like producing a movie, you can write a script treatment, you can try to gauge interest with a studio. Like a book, I mean, yeah, you can write the first chapter, but if you're an unknown author, and have you ever looked up the odds of getting a book deal, getting an advance, writing a bestseller? Like, I mean, the odds of authors converting this huge level of effort into anything meaningful are so statistically small.
Yes.
And yet you did it.
And yeah, I did it. And
so how do you articulate that to people who think that there's people who will hear your story and say, but that's what can be true for her, but for whatever reason, that could not be true for me. How do you try to bridge that to help other people understand that, like, one of us is all of us?
Sorry. That is I do think about that a lot, because sort of, I wouldn't call it crisis, but the problem of replication, like, is this process replicable? Is your process for other people? And I think what is replicable and what is not is, before I wrote my book, before I sold it, there was just no guarantee of a sale. Anyone who has been through the publishing will know, but but I told myself that if I didn't give it my all and try, I would regret that the other outcome more. And so I really just I really just, I mean, my friends will know for those 3.5 years, I like did not see any friends. And I just had to cancel social engagements, parties. I was just working all the time. Including like my husband's family is in Long Island. We'd be there for Christmas, and like I'm working until 4 until Christmas, and then doing the dinner. It really is a lot of personal sacrifice, and I was used to that from seeing my parents do that. And so I think I now it might be easy for me and or possibly for listeners and readers to be like, well, you achieved this thing, and so like you knew it was going to be worth it. But I really didn't know it was going to be worth it before I got to the next level. And I just had to just tell myself that, this line is actually in my book. There's a scene with Nick Saban. I don't know if you know, he's right. And he's at the firm I was at to kind of talk about his process, which he calls the process, and how he's able to be probably one of the greatest college coaches of football coaches of all time. And he's so brilliant on so many things in the process, but there are just lines like, you have to enjoy the process of keeping on. So like if the keeping on means like psychologically suffering, not knowing what the future will be, you have to enjoy that process if you actually want to do the thing. And so he says that. He also says, because I fail is why I succeed. So to not be afraid of failure. And like I'm a debut author. Before this book, I had barely published anything, but because of those failures allows me to, or just, because I kind of didn't work on some other things, I was able to focus on my book and really just try to make it as best as it can be. And then there are other lines like, if you're going to sweep streets like Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. So it's just like, no matter what you do, it could be street sweeping, be the best in the world at it, And so that was just, I took a lot of those lessons into my writing practice and discipline. So I think that's that's certainly what gave me the confidence to continue, even though I knew it was a huge risk.
I love that last bit about the street sweeping. I say all the time that there really are only two categories in the world. There's a small slice that's excellent, and there's just a huge swath that's average. And frankly, there's a lot of different degrees of average. You can be above average, but in terms of the world's estimation, you're still average. You can be below average, but it's all just part of the average. The average is like 98% of everything is just the average. And it doesn't really matter. In the grand scheme, it's forgettable, it's ignorable. That may be dehumanizing to say, but it's like people really only care about the excellent. And it can be like really tough love in this world, but it's like, just be excellent. Just be excellent. Do whatever you have to do to be excellent, or accept the irrelevance of being any less.
Yeah.
But it's like Camus said, I'm a sort of existential dilettante, I guess, and like this concept of absurdism. Like, the world is absurd. We're not. Our place is not to like moralize about the reality of the world. There's maybe some higher power whose job that is. We just got to live in it. And if you're going to accept, you either accept the world or you don't. And if you don't accept the world, there's a tragic option where some people take themselves out of it. But if you're going to stick around, that just is what it is. There's the excellent that gets all the attention and all the opportunity and all the income and all the glory and all the, whatever. And then there's the everything else where, like, if you're not going to just keep pushing and keep eating bitterness and keep sweeping streets at a ridiculously high standard and keep doing whatever the thing is, then you just sort of have to choose. You decide. You choose your heart.
You choose
I
your
love
heart.
that saying. Yeah, you choose your heart.
Exactly. And I think this is also in the book. Like Nick Saban talks about how success is against human nature. So you have to fight every instinct to you have to fight every instinct just to succeed, because success, everyone wants success and excellence, as you say, but it actually it's not. It's against the human condition.
You just changed my life, Carrie. Success is against human nature. Like, you just made all of my struggles make sense. I run a platform where we're trying to help thousands of people achieve success. And I'm like, I always feel like I'm banging my head against the wall vicariously, so they don't have to bang their head against the wall quite so much. And at the end of the day, it's like, why is this so hard? It's because we're all hardwired. It's like we were talking earlier about the evolutionary value of risk tolerance, but that's against human nature.
Yes.
It
is human nature to want to be in the cave so the tiger never gets you, in your cave tiger scenario.
Right. But there's no success.
Yeah, there's no,
at least in the sense that we ourselves aggrandize in our minds. Like, if our version of success is spending our life in the cave, that's awesome. But I actually think that goes to what you're saying about finding joy in the process. And finding joy in the work. But the key to that, to go to your point about it's against human nature, is delayed gratification.
Yes.
And delayed gratification, there's nothing that's more of, anti-human nature in our, dopaminergic wiring than delayed gratification. Like, we want it now. We want to swipe right now.
And for me,
or left. Actually, which way is it? I've never used it. I've just heard, but
swipe
some way.
Swipe some way. And, for me, a lot of it was retraining my brain to the reward was the dopamine. I mean, it's hard, but like the reward, the dopamine hit is actually just fully on doing the thing that is fully meaningful to me. And it's just so hard. It's so hard in the moment because we're wired to want to, be rewarded with raises, money, status, gifts. But actually it's really doing the thing you want to do. And so
what's your active process for, and I know we're about out of time, so that we'll call this the last question, but do you have an active process for rewiring or trying to reconnect the dopamine reward system to like smaller and smaller incremental activities so that you're not always having to wait so long? Or you can at least feel better in the moment. You know what I mean? Like, rather than saying,
I do know exactly what you mean.
It's like, I'll feel good when a chapter is done or a page is done or a profound sentence is done even.
Okay, so this is the honest truth. And not to talk about Nick Saban so much, but there's also something he says something related to this in the book too. It's like, okay, it is important to celebrate small wins. I think that is just so true. But I am just, the truth is, like, I am just working all the time, and I train my subconscious to work all the time too. Something I do, and I'm I'm never really happy with my work. I'm always trying to improve. And so actually just that, nothing makes me happier than when I've trained my subconscious to solve a problem and I wake up the next day and there is the solution to a scene that I've been working on. And so I think how I train my brain for the little wins is this is an especially big problem or not big, but just in terms of time horizon problem for book writers, because books, as you say, yours took 4 years on and off. Whereas maybe if you publish a shorter piece, you can get the byline, you can get the emotional hit of doing something to completion. A book is a much longer process where you might not get any of that delayed, as you say, delayed gratification for years. For me, my creative process is problem solving. I get into the really, really weeds on both language and ideas. And I really this is hard to describe, but I really do kind of work all the time. Even so, I am a workaholic, and even at night, like if I'm watching movies, I'm always thinking how this movie succeeded and didn't succeed and how that relates to my work. So I've like trained my subconscious to continuously be critiquing what it is how I'm engaging with in the world. And so my little hits of dopamine are just like, so for example, The Wire, the television series, and this is the last thing I'll say. So The Wire really and these are the hits that just make me so, so, so happy. And no one's really going to know this except me. So it's a purely internal sort of like hit of satisfaction I was trying to, The Wire at some point, an episode is 60 minutes. And then there are something like the scenes go so fast in that, let's just say, they have 60 scenes, often more per hour, 1 minute per scene. And how did they, and I was having this problem in my book where I had all these scenes, but I wanted it to feel like a holistic narrative rather than a collage. There are many great collage books, but mine, I really wanted to feel like one narrative. And I solved that problem by watching The Wire. And it wasn't intentionally like, I'm going to solve this problem by watching The Wire, but I was just happened to be watching The Wire. And there are all these scenes with different characters that don't seem to connect, but actually, just in terms of narrative form, they put the seed of a scene that you're watching actually in a previous scene. So every scene is connected and just a very subconscious level of preparing the reader or the viewer in that case of what's going to happen. So I solved a problem of mine, but at like, I don't know, 10 o'clock at night when I'm off and watching The Wire. But I mean, that kind of problem solving ability just all the time, it gives me immense satisfaction.
Well, it's obvious. I mean, one of you may or may not follow Grant Cardone online, but one of his sort of like, pithy sayings is be obsessed or be average.
Yeah.
And you're obsessed. Clearly you're obsessed. But that concept of obsession, and I'll declare I'm obsessed. I actually don't know that we're workaholics. I think that implies a certain addiction loop that, involves shame and, self-flagellation and all this stuff. I actually prefer the concept of obsession. By the way, the root word of obsession, it literally means the opposite of sitting down.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Obsession is the opposite of sitting down. So it's like you're just always moving, right? Yeah. But and I prefer that, but a lot of it at a neurological level is like you have tuned your reticular activating system. So that, which is, for those that don't know, that's essentially what orients your conscious attention. It's like of all the things, we forget 99% of what happens in our environment, but the things that we remember, it's like once I say try not to look for yellow cars, now your reticular activating system is going to look for yellow cars, even if you're trying not to, right? So that sort of tuning. Your reticular activating system is tuned to be solving your problems, your literary problems or whatever problems you've oriented towards all the time. And that, some people would call that obsession or unhealthy workaholism. I would suggest you just really, really deeply care about excellence in a part of your life that you've connected some amount of your identity to. And
that's such a smart take. And that's exactly.
And the question I would ask others is like, well, what have you connected your identity to that your reticular activating system is constantly scanning for? And what's your standard within that? If you've attached your identity to being a fun person who has lots of friends and is the life of the party, then your reticular activating system is always looking for stuff to do that's probably not leading you towards your goals because that your identity isn't aligned with your goals. And like, that's the work. So there's nothing wrong with it. Stop moralizing and just self-reflect and do the work.
Right. Well, in the beginning of my book, I actually talk about how at one point in my life, I was kind of envious of gold diggers because at least they knew what they wanted and they went for it. And my problem was at the time, at the start of the book, I didn't know what I wanted. So I was kind of envious of anyone who knew exactly what they wanted in life and just went for it. Because I think to your point of not moralizing, in my book, I'm not saying private equity itself is good or bad, there are good things about it and there are plenty of problematic things about it. All of this has been much reported on by, financial journalists at major places.
And the TV show Billions.
And the TV show Billions, of which there's a tiny character based off me in Billions. I think I'm just, in my book, I'm providing sort of a narrative framework onto which people can map their own life paths and think about how they would have done something differently or not. And I don't need people to agree with me. I'm not trying to moralize anything in my book, except to say, this is the journey that I went on, and I should be allowed my journey. And I've always wanted to be a writer, and it took me on, I had to take a detour to get there. And mostly because, I grew up under poverty circumstances, and financial stability was very, very important to me at a certain point in my time. And then I actually realized I don't care about that as much as I care about just doing the thing I love and focusing my attention on that. And that is writing and solving literary problems on the page.
Well, I feel like that's a beautiful note to end on. This should be allowed to be my journey. And actually, I feel like we just closed the loop from where we began all the way back in communist China, Cultural Revolution China. This should be allowed to be my journey.
Yeah. And in China, people weren't really allowed the freedom of going on a journey. The government kind of told you what job you had, where you lived, what city you lived, and now I think that is the freedom for which I am most grateful for in America.
Yeah, and even today in America, where the economics may have shifted in a way that feels burdensome or unfair, the reality is we're still getting, it's like Viktor Frankl said, I don't get to choose my circumstances, but the last right of man, the last of that which can be taken is our choice in how we respond to things.
Exactly.
And that our journey is our choice in how we respond to things. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have that freedom. Yeah. And not everybody does. Carrie, thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course. And of course, to all you viewers and listeners out there, I tell you this every time, you're the best part of this show. Even when Carrie's on, you're the best part of this show. So grateful we got this time together, and I can't wait to see you next time. Take care.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
We are so worried that if I change horses, if I change my career, that I'm going to be perceived as a failure. And I can tell you from this side of the headhunting table, those are the best people ever.